Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on catastrophic auto claims, how to manage and prevent them. My name is Reynolds Whalen. I'm the Director of Sales Operations at Webber and Grinnell Insurance in Northampton, Massachusetts. We're a proud member of the national firm Alera Group, Inc., and you'll hear from a couple of my colleagues today as panelists. Before I jump in and introduce our panelists today, I want to go over a few quick housekeeping items. We're hoping this will be an interactive session today, and the way that you can interact is by posting questions. If you look at your toolbar at the bottom of the screen, there should be a Q&A button. Anytime you have a question to bring to the floor, please put it in and we'll get it to the floor for everyone to discuss. Also, we do have closed captioning enabled, so the icon that says CC at the bottom of your screen will allow you to turn that on or off as you wish. This is being recorded today, and we will distribute it to our attendees and also to anyone who couldn't make it. And that's about all I have to say. I'm excited to get started today and to introduce you to some really excellent panelists who are going to have a lot of insight for us today as we talk about these issues. So first, I'm going to introduce to you Rob Moseley. So Rob is the one of the founding partners of Moseley Marcinac Law Group. Hey, Rob, how you doing today?
Good morning.
Rob's down in Greenville, South Carolina, but he also serves as national counsel for several insurance companies and regional and national motor carriers and manages active litigation in 20 to 30 states at any given time. So he's in South Carolina now, but who knows where he'll be tomorrow. Rob's entire practice is focused on transportation and logistics. He has decades of experience representing trucking companies, brokers, logistics companies, and their insurance carriers. And he handles commercial transportation accidents, federal and state safety regulations, freight claims, insurance coverage disputes. Rob has tried more than 80 cases to jury verdict in federal and state courts. He's an amazing resource, and thanks so much for joining us, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, we've got Lee A. Kantor, a managing partner of Hightower, Stratton, Novigrad, and Kantor Law Firm down in Florida. How you doing today, Lee?
Very well, Reynolds. Thank you for having me.
Totally. So Lee was raised out here in Western Massachusetts, the foothills of the Berkshires. I know a lot of people joining us today are in our area. So native son there. He's represented clients in a number of high-profile cases, including the Champlain Towers South condominium collapse in Surfside near Miami. You may have heard of that one. Lee has tried many cases involving trucking, auto negligence, bodily injury, and more. So great to have your expertise today, Lee, and welcome.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we've got Joe Peplinski. Joe is the Vice President of Risk Management at Haylor, Freyer Coon Insurance Agency in Syracuse, also a member of Alera Group. How you doing today, Joe?
Good morning. How are we doing?
Great. Joe is our trucking and transportation practice leader. So he advises on insurance programs and coverages, but also focuses on risk management tools specific to the transportation industry. Joe is our expert in all things transportation and trucking, and it's great to have you and your insight today, Joe.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Mat Geffin. Mat is a partner and head of sales at Webber and Grinnell Insurance here in Northampton with me and Alera Group Company. Hey, Mat, how you doing today?
Morning, everyone.
Matt actually works on the other side of this wall behind me. We work very closely together. So Matt specializes in trucking and transportation also. He helped develop our risk platform, which stands for risk management, insurance and bonds, safety and compliance. It's a comprehensive tool to help our clients get the best coverage at the lowest cost and to foster an excellent safety culture. And I'll be moderating today's session, but Matt will certainly jump in with further insight as he is also an expert in the field. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's jump in, fellas. We got this session's gonna cover 4 main areas. We're gonna start by talking about nuclear verdicts, what those are. We're gonna talk a little bit about the impact of social inflation. We'll spend a good deal of time talking on prevention and training, alignment between like policies and reality and what companies are doing to protect themselves. And then we'll wrap up by just talking about, well, when something like this happens to you, what do you do? What insight, especially do the attorneys have on how you can best handle situations that might come up? So for each section, we're going to start with a quick poll. I'm going to launch the first one now about nuclear verdicts. So everyone out there as our attendees, here we go. So question 1, nuclear verdicts are defined as, you've got 4 choices here: an accident with multiple fatalities, an accident that results in more than $1 million in damages, an accident that results in a verdict where the jury awards, I can't see the rest of that question, but I think it's over, $5 million. And then the final option is an accident that results in a verdict where the jury awards over $10 million. So we'll give it a second here. I see people putting in their thoughts. Oh, we're pretty evenly split here on this one, on what people think it is. Give about 10 more seconds. Don't worry, we're not giving demerits or prizes for right or wrong answers here.
I was gonna say, do we get to see who answered and how?
No, unfortunately not. I think Zoom has that up there for a reason. But
I'm
all
pretty
right.
sure I got this one right.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results so people can see what everyone said. So the correct answer is the last one. A verdict where the jury awards more than $10 million, which seems intense, and it is, but it's also becoming more and more prevalent as time goes on. So we wanted to introduce the concept of nuclear verdicts, and we're going to jump right in to talk about more about trends and what that means. So I'm going to direct this first question to Lee. Let's start with Lee. So nuclear verdicts have appeared more and more in trucking verdicts in the past few years. And I wanted to ask, do you expect that trend to continue into the future?
Well, thanks, Reynolds. And before I answer your question, I just want to say it's not scary to me, but maybe disheartening that so many people thought it was verdicts only over 5 million. And the reason I find it disheartening is, well, part of it's good. It means a lot of you probably haven't been sued frequently, because as an attorney who deals with litigation every day, $5 million is sort of turning into run of the mill. So, we'll talk about this more, but trends, do I think it's going to continue? Listen, I don't see any reason why the tactics that are leading to nuclear verdicts would change from plaintiffs' counsels, right? It doesn't make any sense. They're doing well. What I do expect to change, and I can talk a little bit about the tactics, but what I do expect to change is the number of nuclear verdicts for folks that are well prepared. That, from my standpoint as an attorney, we're being trained daily. We are being trained constantly on how to combat what we call reptilian tactics, and I can kind of give you a better definition of that in a minute. But also, how we need to run our trials here to avoid these verdicts. Now, granted, it doesn't just happen at trial. And we'll talk more about that too, but it really starts at home. It really starts before an accident even happens. So to simply answer your question, Reynolds, yeah, there are going to continue to be nuclear verdicts. You may see them less, and you may see them less against, some of the bigger companies. It was bigger companies getting it at first, just because they had deeper pockets probably and larger insurance reserves. But I think that those are the companies that are going to put the highest level of resources into avoiding and combating the tactics that lead to those verdicts.
Rob, do you have any other insight to offer to that and what you've seen as trends in the recent past as well?
Sure. I'll tell you that my perspective on it, in the trucking world has been that it was like somebody flipped a switch in 2011, and that was when we saw the real changes. And since that time, except for maybe a little slowdown when COVID was putting trials on hold, we've seen verdicts of over $10 million against trucking companies about every month. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, wrongful death case in Michigan resulted in an $86 million verdict. It was against a Canadian trucking company that is generally considered to be one of the safest fleets in the world. And so, you wonder how does stuff like that happen to those companies, when they're using all the, but the bottom line is like Lee was saying, the plaintiff's lawyers, their goal is to try to find a blind spot in your organization, and to exploit the blind spot. And apparently for that company, it was something having to do with a driver who had some sort of treatment for Parkinson's, and the driver had a valid medical certificate, but there was something going on with Parkinson's disease, and apparently the jury felt like they should have pulled the guy off the road with those symptoms and those medications or whatever. So everybody's got blind spots, and the bottom line is that we've got to be looking at those blind spots and trying to figure out how, the definition of a blind spot is, you don't know it. And so you need somebody that's kind of divorced from your organization to look at it and say, hey, this is something you need to look at, because by definition, a blind spot is something you don't know about. So if you think you don't have any blind spots, you're actually you're saying what you need to say, because it's a blind spot. That's right. So anyway, that's kind of what the latest of the trends here.
Great. And I was going to ask about smaller companies as well, because so far we've talked about some larger ones, and Lee referenced that. And we also just got a question from one of our attendees about non-trucking verdicts, companies that have fleets of vehicles that have exposures to, how exposed are they to larger or even nuclear verdicts? So could the two of you, let's start with Lee, like have you seen these really large settlements and verdicts come in for smaller organizations, or is it mostly the big companies? And is it primarily trucking companies, or can it affect say a landscaper who has a fleet of vehicles and gets in a horrible accident, something like that?
Yeah. Let me answer your second question first. Absolutely. It can be anybody that's driving on the road. I mean, think about it like this. There's rarely ever a single case that you have where more than one vehicle from any given company is involved. So if your company is a florist that has a couple delivery trucks, right? But something catastrophic happens, you're absolutely exposed to a nuclear verdict. Obviously, it makes more sense for the plaintiff's bar to go after companies with larger insurance reserves, and knowing that they're going to have umbrella policies, and worst case scenario, they get through all of those. These companies have a ton of assets that they can seek to go after. A smaller company might be in better shape, especially if it's an LLC. Here in Florida, at very minimum, your home is always protected as a homestead. So, there are some ways to protect yourself. But yeah, it's absolutely potentially going to affect smaller companies, and realistically, some of these smaller companies are well insured, even if they are small. A smart company has a good umbrella policy, has good excess carriers that they're putting on notice of stuff like this. So if I'm plaintiff's counsel and I find out you've got $25 million in insurance money, I'm going to my reptilian tactics book and figuring out how I can get as much of that as possible. Doesn't matter who you are.
And you've said reptilian tactics a couple of times. Can you define that just briefly?
Yeah, sorry. I do this because I talk with other attorneys. We all talk about this all the time. Basically, the simple version of this is there was a book by a couple of guys who are trial attorneys and are teaching the plaintiff's bar to tap into a part of your brain known as that reptilian portion. Basically, it means that they tap into your sense of fear and your sense of safety. It's, they trigger that like kind of that pre-fight or flight feeling, right? So what they do is they go into the jury, and they're not allowed to use the golden rule, at least here in Florida. Most states are the same way. You can't say, put yourself in the plaintiff's shoes. Imagine what you would have done in the defendant's shoes. Can't do that. But what you can do is make them worry that all of the trucks on the road from this company are a danger to society at large. And that leads people to worry about their family, to worry about their coworkers. And you essentially employ the feelings that come along with golden rule. And the people don't even understand that it's happening to them. It is prying on the emotions of the jurors when they've been told they are supposed to leave their hearts out and their heads in by making them worried about safety in general.
Great, thanks for that. Rob, if you seem to handle much larger cases, I think, given your experience, but are you aware of smaller companies and non-trucking companies also being hit with large verdicts in the recent past?
Yeah, it is. It's not limited to 26,000 pound and up vehicles. We see it every day with smaller delivery vehicles. You know, your cargo vans, your fleet vehicles that you know don't hit that 10,000 pound commercial vehicle definition. But yeah, anybody who runs a fleet, and the you know, I don't have any stock in camera manufacturers, but I'll tell you, I'm a huge fan. If I had a fleet of vehicles out there, and sometimes I've got 7 kids, so sometimes I feel like I do, but it's but I'd have those cameras put in my vehicles, and just to know what my drivers are doing. And it's people that driving the vehicles not your primary job. It's you know, you mentioned landscapers, but you know, the Texas and Oklahoma oil service companies that have all these fleets of vehicles, they're getting hit with big verdicts in non-commercial vehicles or smaller commercial vehicles. So we're seeing a lot of that. It's certainly not limited to the large 26,000 pound vehicles. And
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rob.
yeah, well, and it's and a lot of it is you know, the rental box trucks. Those are you know, somebody goes out and, you know, needs a rent a box truck for a few days, or, you know, as part of the business. That seems to be a pretty common scenario for accidents, is these short-term rentals.
If I can just add some flavor to Reynolds, and I agree with what Rob said, and that really is all, you know, transportation based. But you know, just in case any of our attendees here really don't deal with transportation issues, you know, we see this everywhere. I do a lot of premises liability. We do a lot in the gas and oil industry, and we have folks that own gas stations where there's no vehicles involved in accidents. I do a lot of construction related issues. Obviously, you mentioned the Surfside case. I mean, that one didn't go to a verdict, but it settled for almost $1 billion. Okay, so I mean, this affects everybody, because it's not just reptilian tactics. It's not just negligent accidents. There's a view of the world and money that's very different right now with jurors than it was, say, 15 years ago when I had my first trial. And so this definitely affects everyone. The same tactics are being used. Doesn't matter what the basis of the case is.
Reynolds, I actually have a question for either Lee or Rob to answer, but a lot of times I'll be sitting and doing a review with one of my insureds, and we'll be talking about limits, right? And what are the appropriate limits to purchase? And if I buy higher limits, does that expose me to higher verdicts? Or, you know, so do you, and that's a pretty common question I get. Joe, I don't know if you get those questions as well, but
all the time.
Yeah. So I'm just curious from a legal
question.
standpoint, you know, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I'll be happy to take a first jump at that, and then I'll let Lee correct me if I said it wrong.
Don't count on it.
I mean, if you have a substantial fleet, and by that I mean maybe, let's say, 100 trucks, I think 5 million is the I can sleep at night number. And I get this response a lot of times that says, well, if I have 2 million, if I have 3 million, they'll, you know, they won't settle for $1 million, they'll want 3. And okay, maybe there's a little bit of truth to that, but I'll tell you that frequency is a bigger issue than severity in your world. And the way that you hurt yourself with that is that if you only have $1 million in coverage, and the case is, let's say the case is worth 500, but they demand $1 million and they won't take less than $1 million, your insurance company is going to pay $1 million to get that case settled, because they don't want to take the chance that it's going to go above $1 million. If you have 3 million, that case settles for 500,000 because they can take the chance that the verdict is going to go above $1 million because you've got more. And so your frequency, your loss runs really get the benefit of having extra coverage there, because that's something that you've given the insurance company the ability to fight. Whereas if you only have $1 million and the case is, borderline $1 million, they're going to pay $1 million, and they're not going to be able to fight it because you've hamstrung them. They don't have the tools they need to fight without exposing you, and they're not going to expose you. So that's where that comes from.
The only thing I would add to that is, and I agree with everything Rob just said, the only thing I would emphasize, not even add, is just to find, you got to find that sweet spot, right? Because like Rob said, $1 million's probably not enough. They're going to go after more, even if they, like in addition of the idea that you're going to run your entire aggregate on a single case, even though you got, a year's worth of coverage there. Plaintiffs' counsels, at least down here in Florida, $1 million ain't going to do it. They'll go in for more. They're going to push everybody. They're going to go for an excess verdict. They're going to try to create a bad faith situation if it's a trucking case, if there's a separate carrier. But also is 5 million just inviting lawsuits? Maybe. So maybe it is 3. But I mean, for each individual, you kind of have to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, and let me jump back in too and say this is that if you only have $1 million, you're guaranteeing that they're going to add the broker or the shipper that gave you the load to the lawsuit. And when they do that, if those companies have to make a payment, they're going to look to you to reimburse them for that money. So it's coming out of your pocket, on the front end or the back end. So if you got several million in insurance, you're going to be in much better shape to withstand that kind of a claim.
I think another important perspective is sometimes when we're talking about these accidents, we're thinking fatality. And I would just share a story with you. This just happened this past year. Driver falls asleep behind the wheel as he comes up over the crest of a hill. Red light ahead. 4 cars in either lane stopped at the red light, and the driver blows through 8 vehicles. And now you have 6 fatalities at the scene, 5 life flighted. So these numbers we're talking about might be on 1 fatality. What happens when you have multiple families with multiple fatalities, or picture a school bus? So, Matt, back to your question, we're always talking about protecting and positioning. And when we're protecting, it's got to be worst case scenario mindset, right? And so worst case scenario isn't a fatality. It's multiple fatalities, multiple parties involved. $1 million doesn't cover a fatality, let alone if there's multiple families involved. So you have to keep that mindset there, because I've seen this time and time again.
Yeah.
And then if I could just touch on going back to the original question, the trend. So Rob kind of alluded to it, but I just want to share, I was at a recent truck safety symposium, and the speaker actually talked about 2 years straight, 24 months of a nuclear verdict every single month. And not only is the trend continuing, but what we're also seeing is the trend, the size of the nuclear verdicts is getting larger and larger. If you look at 2 of the recent ones, 2020, there was 411 million was the verdict. And then most recently in 2021, we had our first $1 billion verdict. So those numbers are continuing to climb. And I think where I can bring value to the panel here is the other perspective of the side of, for me, I'm asking, how does this impact you, right? And in my world is the truck insurance world as an agent, right? Saying, okay, truck insurance carriers have been exiting, right? Because over the last decade, they've seen for every dollar paid in insurance premiums, about $1.10 paid out in insurance claims. So if they're losing money, we've seen carriers exiting. And when carriers are exiting the space and there's fewer carriers, those remaining carriers have to do one of 2 things: choose to join and exit or raise their rates. So we've been seeing rates going up. We've been seeing excess rates going up because the excess limits, the umbrella limits, are getting pierced and penetrated more than they ever have before. So this is impacting you.
Yeah.
That's great. Joe, you, I don't know if you meant to do this, but you teed up the next poll question really nicely. So
good old segue, Joe.
That was great. Love that. So this is about the size of an average verdict for a truck crash. So I'm going to launch the poll now. So from 2010 to 2018, the average size went up from 1 million to 5 million, which is a 400% increase. Was it 1.5 million to 6 million, which is a 300% increase. 2 million to 8.4 million, which is a 320% increase, or 2.3 million to 22.3 million, which is an 870% increase. See everybody weighing in here. No one's chosen the, oh, someone just chose the smallest one. I was going to say people are getting the message here on large numbers. All right, I'll give another 5 seconds or so. All right, once again, we are, let me share the results here. We're pretty evenly split here on the last two. And actually the correct answer is the last one, from 2.3 to $22.3 million, an 870% increase. And this is, we can send this out as part of the resources after the panel, but we got this from an article in fleetowner.com. So, I mean, obviously that's a massive change over just an 8-year period. And I wanted to ask, maybe we start with Rob on this one. What is the cause for this? You know, people talk about the term social inflation. Maybe that's part of it, but what is causing these numbers to go up so fast and so high?
Yeah, we do hear that term, social inflation, and I don't know exactly what social inflation is, but if I had to define it, I would say that it's this idea that when you walk into the convenience store, you see a neon sign that says that the lottery number is now $600 million or what have you. I think that's what social inflation is that we you know, it's monopoly money. And people don't really have any kind of understanding of what the value of that money really is, or how long it takes a trucking company to make a dollar. So I think that you've got that, and I think that I would say that you got to factor in the Trump factor, and I don't, you know, I'm as conservative as they come, so don't hear what I'm not saying. Not a political statement, but we're getting in traditionally red counties, especially Texas, Georgia, we're getting verdicts that are really high in traditionally Republican conservative counties, and so there's the Trump factor is this idea of you know, ironically, because of who Trump really is. I mean, you know, Trump's you know, he's a symbol for let's stick it to the man. You know, let's you know, anti-government, anti big company, and that's kind of coming back in some of these verdicts. We're seeing this social inflation or this Trump backlash or what have you.
Yeah, I think what you're getting to is just a shift in thinking nationally, brought about by the pandemic, social unrest, severe economic conditions, and I guess I'm also, to change the topic slightly, is how have these things affected the tactical decisions you make on your trucking cases? So including attempts to settle cases pre-suit or early on in litigation, and as well as your defense tactics and resolution strategies. Because all the things you just mentioned, Rob, I think are just indicative of an overall shift in thinking about these things.
Well, there aren't any safe jurors anymore. I mean, we used to run to these the idea that you can find good jurors that would be trucking friendly, and you know, I'm just not sure there's a lot of those out there anymore. You know, given what we see in terms of where the verdicts are coming from, and so I think like Lee said, and I think part of the story is the reptile thing. I think another part of the story is that as trucking companies and a lawyer representing trucking companies, I think we haven't done as good a job of telling our story as we could have in these cases. That we don't talk about. We don't talk as much about our company. Here's the history of who we are. This is what we provide. We've been delivering to this community for years and years and years. And here's our trucking company started with my grandfather, and we've been delivering to you since World War II. Whatever the story.
Making a human connection, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think we've seen the demonizing of corporations and business.
Right. I mean,
overall,
I think it doesn't. I was just going to say, I don't think that's specific even necessarily to trucking. In many cases, doing other types of fleets, it's a business issue sometimes in terms of like you said, demonizing of corporations. When there's an issue.
And Lee, have you seen the same thing? Like, what's your experience been?
Yeah, I mean, Rob makes a great point. As defendants in litigation and as defense counsels as a whole, we're behind, and we're trying to play catch up because plaintiffs' counsels have been using psychology. They've been telling stories differently. They've been planning differently for depositions. And I think, Reynolds, on one of our calls, I said to you guys, somebody someone much smarter than me said that nuclear verdicts don't happen in courtrooms. They happen in the depositions before. They happen in discovery. And the reason I bring that up is that the plaintiffs' counsels have been doing this for years. And it's only more recently that books like I was talking to you guys about before, Nuclear Verdicts, this is something for defense attorneys. It's only recent that we're really making a push on this stuff as a group. And coming to folks like that are on here who own businesses or are risk managers and telling you what you need to do. And Rob's point about personalizing the corporation is huge. I mean, to me, that's everything. I've been in so many trials, and almost all my clients are large corporations. And I've been there where I've had a trucking guy sitting next to me. And I don't mean to sound insulting to any trucking people, but it wasn't. It was just some guy. Right? It's some guy from a company who owns that has a bunch of trucks on the road. By the way, you drive on that road, don't you? Do you like all those trucks out there? It's different when I've got, Sally, who's the daughter of the founder of the company. She's been working here since she was 15. By the way, the family still owns it. And yeah, they deliver all your medicine that you get to your local pharmacy. And, that's what they do. You got to personalize them because it's very easy to throw $1 million verdict at a corporation. It's not as easy to do it to Sally and her family business.
Yeah, it's a great point. So I want to shift the conversation now that we've really set the framework. We've defined nuclear verdicts. We've got a sense of what the scene is like. I really want to talk about prevention, training, what companies can do to protect themselves. And this is going to start bringing Joe and Matt into the conversation a lot more as well. I'm going to start with the poll question, which is it's a very subjective question that came out of a conversation with Lee, and it's going to spark some interesting conversation, I think. So let's go ahead and launch this. So, which of these technology-based items meant to mitigate risk tends to be the hottest button issue in the courtroom? And again, pretty subjective question. We're just curious as to what people come up with. So we've got forward-facing dash cams, the inward-facing dash cams, radar sensors, live GPS tracking devices. So far, we got a lot of agreement on one of these. All right, I'll give it another 10 seconds here or so. All right, let's wrap it up. All right, let me show you what people are saying. So the most chosen answer, inward-facing dash cams, and that is actually the answer we came up with as well. And Lee, I want to start with you on this one because it came from a conversation with you, and I want you just to explain more about why you said that same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it has less to do with having dash cams, and in my experience, it's usually been less about what they even show when they're operating properly. what tends to be the hot button issue that I see is when either you have, let's say you have a fleet of trucks and you have inward facing dash cams on some and you don't on others. That's an issue, right? Why didn't you have it on this one? We would have been able to see what was going on. There's another issue we've actually faced frequently, and it's not just inward facing, it's outward facing. If the camera's not pointing where it's supposed to be, there's like this automatic presumption by everybody that I've ever spoken to that the driver must have done something to fidget with it, right? There's this, it's almost like we have this presumption that we have to now overcome at the beginning. But yeah, I mean, listen, inward facing cameras, if you don't have them, why didn't you have them? If you do have them, I've rarely had a case where our driver looks like he's doing everything he's exactly supposed to. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't, but you really do need it. I mean, if you don't have it, and you have the opportunity to have it, the jury's going to hear that.
Yeah, someone just asked the question actually from our attendees. Do you recommend inward and outward, or just outward, so it's not showing what the driver's doing at all times, which you kind of just talked about? But I'd also be interested to hear from Joe and Matt and Rob too on this. Like, is it better to just have you completely covered, or is the inward a liability?
I'll defer to others, but I will tell you that if you're going to do it, just make sure that you do it on all of them.
So I'd be happy to step up on this one. So to me, I've seen both sides. I've seen insurance carriers that say there's even programs, there's captives that only do the forward facing and they do it to protect themselves. And then there's many that have the two-way cameras. And I will tell you, in my experience, in my travels with working with large fleets across the country, you want to change your culture. You want to get skin deep with the drivers. You want to change driver behavior. You need that camera on the driver, right? So, you know, I think there's two conversations here. Can the backwards facing camera be used against you? Of course. But I've heard a lot of the mindset be, you know what, now you know how to prepare your defense if your driver's not doing the right things.
That was going to be my comment there, Joe. And I think that brings up a good point. I'd love to hear Rob or Lee's perspective on that piece, right? So if I have an inward facing camera and I see what happened, does that help me move quicker through the case to maybe settle it out of court or whatever? You know what I mean? Like what's your thought on that?
Well, I guess I'll jump in. So the cameras are fantastic. I love cameras. The first thing, well, let me tell you the 3 rules of the cameras. Number 1 is watch the videos. Number 2, coach the drivers. And number 3, delete the videos. And what I mean by that is the last thing I want is for you to have a driver with a crash and then you send me the last 7 near miss videos the driver had and say, yeah, we coached him after each of these. I mean, the idea is that if we got to seven coaching events, you know, we probably should have turned the guy loose. Okay. So let's coach. And if it's clear that the driver just isn't getting it, we need to use the camera to make an employment decision. Now, also, don't email those videos back and forth among your staff, because if none of you clean out your emails, none of you delete your emails. So once it gets into your email system, it's there forever. So I have a deranged cardinal who keeps attacking my window back here. So he's if you hear you can see him flying around.
We're going to review the footage from the camera later on.
Yeah.
Then delete it.
And delete it.
I will say for the insurance folks on the call, or anybody that's self-insured and is paying their legal fees out of their own pocket, you know, Matt's point is good in terms of the idea that if you've got a bad case, and you know that you're going to be hit, you know, because your driver was doing something wrong and this is going to really get out ahead, you know, you can probably save a whole lot of legal fees by looking at settlement right away, especially if the driver was doing something wrong. I can't speak for every state, but here in Florida, if there's an inward facing camera and that driver is violating some sort of protocols that they've been trained on, or worse, a DOT regulation, you got punitives coming your way, right? Potentially. And they try to get it in any way they can against the company.
And on those inward facing cameras, I would say that there's pushback. You know, the drivers don't like it. They the couple of rules on the inward facing, like Lee said, if the driver's obstructing the camera, then that's termination right there. We can't have that. Now there's all sorts of things about privacy and, especially, with drivers living in their trucks and that kind of thing. But I think a great way to do it is to roll it out gradually and to tell everybody in the fall of 2024, everybody's going to have inward facing cameras. Okay. And so right now we're turning on 10% of them and it's going to be the 10% who are at the bottom of whatever our metrics are, whatever our performance metrics are as a company. So those 10% get it this month. 2 months later, we're going to add 20%, 30%. We're going to gradually put this in play. But you let them warm up to it. And frankly, another thing I'll say is that trucking companies only get to explain one or two things before the jurors quit listening. And so one of the things that you should not have to waste one of the things that you get to explain on why you don't have inward facing cameras and what was the driver doing at the time of the accident. So I'd rather have inward facing cameras. I'd rather know the whole truth. When you run into the back of somebody, if you're not paying attention, if you're on the phone or whatever it is, I'd rather know it on the front end than litigate for 2 years and then find out that we really don't have a good excuse or that your driver was lying to you or whatever else might be going on.
Yeah. We just had a comment come in from the attendees, which actually I think you just answered, but it says, isn't it better not to have the inward facing cameras? So in discovery, the opposing counsel has less to work with. And the person says, I review exterior footage and 99% of the time based on speed and what was going on, I could tell what the driver was likely doing to coach the driver. But I think you just sort of address your perspective on that.
Yeah, the less things we have to explain, the better.
Yeah.
I think the trend you're seeing from an insurance perspective, and Joe can comment too here, is, especially with large, heavy to extra heavy vehicles, cameras are becoming a requirement, right? So we're seeing it with certain programs, especially on the captive side. We're starting to see it more and more with guaranteed cost programs, where if you don't have a truck, a camera in the vehicle outward facing, at a minimum, they're not going to write the program or they're not going to write the coverage. And I could see that, becoming more prevalent, especially with, fleets, and again, right now it's on heavy and extra heavy stuff, but I can see that down the road becoming more and more prevalent. Joe, I don't know if you have a comment.
Yeah, so not only is it commonplace now that carriers are making it a part of their quote that they want telematics, they want cameras, but they're also saying, okay, this is you being a partner in this with me, so we're going to subsidize the cost. Good so point. They're requiring it, but a lot of them are subsidizing the cost of it, and you can see that it's becoming more uncommon to not have cameras. Yep.
Yeah. Again, especially on the heavy and extra heavy vehicles, again, your smaller fleets of your vans and your pickup trucks, it's not there yet. But I mean, if we're sitting in this room, 2 or 3 years from now, could it be there? Maybe. It depends on how this trend goes with size of claims as you move downstream into smaller vehicles. But it would not surprise me.
And I would just add, keep in mind, statistics show, we'll say roughly 70% or 3 out of 4 accidents are caused by the non-professional or the passenger vehicle. If those are the stats, it's pretty nice to be able to show your driver's alert. He's scanning, he's belted, he's focused ahead, his hands are on the wheel. Like, you have the ability to praise that your driver is doing all the right things. I'm a huge believer in two-way cameras.
Yeah.
I'll add.
And I have seen claims, get turned around, and even roadside, we've had some examples of incidents that happen on the road. A camera is there, they show it to the trooper, and now before the truck was going to be cited, and now the passenger vehicle cited, right? And so I think, it's out there, it's real. I mean, it really does help the business.
Yeah, Lee, you wanted to chime in too?
Yeah, since I've been the reptilian guy, I'll just say this much. Imagine you had an accident and your company is in litigation now, and your risk manager or your corporate rep, whoever you've put up, is on is in deposition, and the plaintiff's counsel says something somewhere along the lines, it becomes evident that there were no cameras in the truck. And somebody says it was a decision made by whoever, and we made financial decisions, it wasn't the right time, or whatever. Imagine hearing questions like, you would agree with me that ensuring the safety of other drivers is a top priority, right? Or they would say something like, you would agree with me that a company's never allowed to needlessly endanger the public and the community, right? And then they might say, and they can't make the decision that something's too expensive if safety is the other option, right? So now you get into this position where they're able to go, they don't care about your safety. They made a financial decision so that they could line their pockets and take their profits instead of buying cameras that might have stopped this accident, right? So, listen, imagine that in front of a jury.
That's a great point. And then actually, I wanted to shift away from cameras specifically and talk a little bit more broadly about safety programs, what Joe and Matt, especially what you see transportation companies doing to keep themselves safe. And then I want to talk about in trial how what the companies say they're doing and what they're actually doing can be used in trial. But let's just start with overall, what are some other really important things to consider? Let's start with Joe about what you can do to prevent these things and the safety processes you should follow.
So I would phrase these in building your fleet defenses, right? Building your fleet safety culture. So to me, first off and foremost, it has to be top down. It has to start from the top. There has to be buy-in from the top all the way down to the mechanics and the clerical office, right? Next, I would share that culture is not built in a day. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency. So the daily rituals that fleets have that they build are huge. When I go and travel and sit with fleets, I'm looking for those. Training is not once a year, like going to church on Christmas Eve. Training needs to be regular. It needs to be ongoing. It needs to be consistent. And I like to talk to fleets about hitting training from different angles. There's remote online training you can do. There's camera coaching you can do. Batch sessions where you're grabbing the drivers and it's a lunchbox chat, right? There's pre and post trip inspections training, online training, defensive driver training, mock DOT audits. So I keep going with that. Communication is big to me on building a culture. Do you have a monthly company newsletter? Do your drivers, your safety director, and your entire team know the score, right? Like keeping score matters to me. And I think it's important. Like, do they know your frequency of accidents compared to the benchmark in the industry? Do they know what your CSA behavioral basic scores are? Oftentimes when I'm meeting new fleets and I'm talking to them about their scores, they're doing a driver safety training. Drivers have no clue that they have 4 CSA alerts. How can you improve upon these scores if you don't know? So keeping score matters in those areas. Having a driver ranking, and where you're ranking the drivers based on frequency of accidents, roadside inspections. So now they're getting competitive juices, but in a good way. I like to call it the carrot and the stick in your culture, right? So dangling the carrot for the incentive, and then the stick is I'd call it the accountability and the driver discipline. There has to be consequences to repeat offenders for both failed roadside inspections, out of service, and frequency of accidents. It's important to have both. And obviously taking care of drivers is huge and having that recognition. Accident analysis is a really big part of a culture to me. If I'm looking at loss runs over a 5-year window and I'm seeing the same accident again and again and again, we're repeating the same trend, means we don't have a safety committee. We're not taking a look at, oops.
We still got you, don't worry.
Okay, I thought I lost you. We're not taking a look at these trends and saying, okay, what time of day was the accident? Was the driver fatigued? How many years has he been with us? What was the weather? What was the road conditions like? And when we're analyzing these things, we need to make strategic adjustments based on our analysis. And if we're doing this over time, we're going to continue to get better. Do we have a full-time dedicated safety team? It's asked at every loss control call and visit. Do you have a safety director? Well, we have a safety director, but he's also this, this, and this. He wears multiple hats. They want someone dedicated to safety full time, that this is all they do every single day. And then just going back to where we started, they expect an investment in technology. If you're investing in telematics, you're investing in the cameras. Think about how cool some of these cameras are now, where we have artificial intelligence that's doing real-time coaching of the drivers going down the roadway. So a driver's text messaging, he's going down the road with his phone in hand, he's getting alerted to drop his phone. Driver falls asleep behind the wheel because he's fatigued, he's getting alerted to wake up. Driver's following too closely, he's getting alerted to back off and allow for more spacing. Driver speeding, he's being alerted to slow down. So now you have real-time coaching that stats show it drops the frequency of accidents consistently. So if you do these key things, you are going to build a safety culture. But again, it doesn't happen in a day. It happens by doing these things consistently, being committed to it.
Great. Lee, when we initially talked about this, I found it really interesting, some of the things you were saying about how safety programs are used in the courtroom and sometimes against companies. Can you talk a little bit more about how that can happen sometimes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're prepping for a trial right now where our driver got into a sideswipe accident and didn't even know it, didn't feel it, drove away. So we're dealing with this idea that he left the scene of a crime, right? When we were in deposition and we're going through everything, they had coached him a number of times after, minor stuff, following too closely, maybe speeding through an intersection, et cetera, et cetera. And they coached him, and I was not that I was shocked, but I was dismayed by the initial deposition of the corporate rep talking about, well, wasn't this guy a dangerous driver? You had to discipline him here, discipline him there, discipline him here. And they sort of twisted it, right? They twisted what my clients had done in terms of perfecting and more closely like tightening up this guy's driving. It was more like, listen, Michael Jordan was a great basketball player, but he still took 100 free throws before every practice to keep sharp. We're making these guys as sharp as possible. But yeah, I mean, it's been attacked all over the place. I told you a story where we have another case where they have telemetrics and telematics in the trucks, right? And they cannot start these trucks until they punch in their code and their personalized number, and it doesn't start until they've been off for 11 hours or whatever it is given the circumstances. And we have a case right now with punitives against the company because they allowed this guy to work outside of his 11 hours rest, or I'm sorry, without getting 11 hours rest. How did that happen, you ask? They have this whole safety protocol. They have a safety culture. They're very good. But he came to the lounge. He came to the driver lounge headquarters about 2 hours before his drive started. And he's hanging out and he's looking at his paperwork. And you know what? They considered that working. And the judge is letting the punitives in because he didn't have the requisite number of hours rest. So you got to, like, to Joe's point, yes, safety culture is great. Have the people in place. You got to really follow through. You got to think of the nuances. And so obviously one of the ways you do that is when you get sued or you get these claims, you look back and go, what did we do wrong here? Let's fix it, right? Don't just have your safety culture in place and let it be stagnant. Let it always be a growing, evolving thing.
Yeah, I think an important point here is you can't just say you have a safety director and have your program on paper. You really have to follow through. And as Joe said, it's not a once a year thing. It has to be an integral part of the culture that you can demonstrate and to some point, to a certain degree, prove in a courtroom. Would you agree with that, Rob and Lee?
Yeah.
And Rob, yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And I go back to, you get to explain two things and then the jury just tunes you out. So you've got to make sure that you don't waste those two things on something silly, like having to explain why the guy was on duty, like Lee was saying, the guy's on duty when he gets his paperwork and that kind of thing. So and it's just a blind spot. All those things are blind spots that we've got to constantly monitor for and figure out what that looks like. Now, I get culture is a tough word for me because you can't measure culture. You can't put a letter grade on culture, and it sometimes it gets a little touchy feely for me when I'm trying to when I'm trying to defend this touchy-feely thing in court. And we've had cases where we've been able to exclude this concept of culture, where plaintiffs' lawyers are trying to say that they had a bad safety culture. Because that's generally stuff like that's just not admissible in a court. You don't get to put evidence in that you had 3 accidents, so the 4th one must be your fault too, right? You have to prove the merits of this particular accident, this particular case. So that's something we fight all the time in trying to deal with that. But when you do have a good culture, and there is such a thing as a good culture, it runs the plaintiff's lawyers to something else. Your best day is if your driver made a mistake. Your worst day is if somebody in the building made a mistake. Because when the corporation makes a mistake, it's a lot worse from a jury standpoint than a driver just making a poor decision in the course of driving the truck.
That's a really interesting point.
I don't mean to step on
Lee.
anybody's toes here, but I just want to mention too, since we're talking about safety protocols, safety rules, and culture, I just want to say once again, consistency is key. We have had a case not long ago where, although the judge should have never let most of this discovery be done, they basically got to find out all of the times where people had done similar things to what the driver in this case had done, or the plaintiff in this case, or the defendant in this case had done, and not been fired, or not given the same level of numbers for, they had like a numbering system for points or demerits. Like, you got to be consistent. And if a certain number equals termination, I don't care if you like the guy, you got to get rid of him. Otherwise, if next time he gets in an accident, you're completely screwed.
Yeah. Consistency is key, and follow through is key. Absolutely.
And simplicity, by the way, don't make your point system super complex. Don't give them the opportunity to attack it for that stupid reason.
And I would just add to that, Reynolds, don't have things written in your employee handbook that you're not going to follow through on. When you have an employee handbook, these are your rules of the road, and every employee has a copy of it. That will end up in court. And if you're not executing on certain hiring practices that you have laid out in there, certain training practices that are laid out in there, you're breaking your own rule. You might not be breaking an FMCSA rule or regulation, but you're breaking your own rule. And these are the safety rules that Lee was talking about early on that they're going to come after in the reptile theory.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I have one other question for this section, but that we've mostly addressed, but just in case there's more to say about it. The question was going to be about how we talk a lot about safety training, safety programs, how you can stay safe, but a lot less about training for potential litigation specifically. Now, they're definitely related, and that's what I'm saying. We've gotten to a lot of this already, but is there anything any of you have to say about, is there any training or resources out there to help prepare for potential litigation that might be beyond just like, let's have a great safety program? And I actually don't have anyone specific to direct this into, so just jump right in.
Yeah, well, I can tell you from my standpoint, we talked a lot about preparing witnesses, but I don't know if that's really what we're getting at here. We do safety training from the lawyer's standpoint for especially our waste removal clients all the time. And yeah, I mean, I think that when a lot of times when people get into litigation for the first time, especially as a defendant, they're shocked. I didn't know this is how it goes. I didn't know they could ask me these kind of questions. I didn't know they were going to go into this background. I didn't know they'd even know about X, Y, and Z. So one of the things we do is instant response. I'm sure most defense firms that have trucking do. And we train these guys on when we get there, here's how it's going to work. You're not going to say X, Y, and Z. You're going to take pictures of this. You're going to say this. You're going to wait till I get here to say that. So yeah, I mean, I think that you can't just rely on the idea that if we have safety from a trucking standpoint at a trucking company, we're all set. There's other things to consider. And I would invite your attorneys in, and chances are they're firms like ours, they'll come in and talk to your people about, best practices to avoid certain things. And if we want to, I'll talk more about training your corporate witnesses for deposition, but that seems like it's a little outside of what we're talking about. Right?
That might be a little too in the weeds, but yeah. I appreciate that. Well, let's move on to kind of a final section here of just when it happens, you know, if it does happen to you, how to approach that, and maybe a few more anecdotes from the two attorneys on the call. We have a poll question. This is also from that same article about factors that influence verdicts. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that here in case anybody's falling asleep out there. Come back. Here we are. Take the poll question. Here we go. So according to this article, at least, and I always avoid the term 100%. So let's just say mostly, there's 5 factors brought against defendant drivers that yielded, let's say, most verdicts in favor of the plaintiff. So which of these is not one of those? So 5 of these yielded, according to this article, verdicts in favor of the plaintiff every time. So hours of service or logbook violations, lack of clean driving histories, the age of the driver, driving under the influence, fleeing the scene, or health-related issues. So 5 of those, according to this article, basically you're screwed if it's true, but one of them doesn't really matter or doesn't matter as much. I think we stumped.
All of the above.
No, I think we stumped Lee on this one.
Yeah, I make a guess.
Yeah, well, let's let the people are mostly in agreement so far on this one. We'll give it another 10 seconds or so.
Well, Lee and I told you which 2 they weren't
Yeah.
in what we were saying earlier. So
Right. Well, we'll see. This is according to one article here. So
Yeah.
I actually like when people disagree on an answer because it sparks good discussion. So, all right, let's wrap it up here. Yeah, and everyone said age, and that is the one that I threw in that's not part of the article. The other 5 of these, though, and you know, Rob brought up the point about the health issue that a driver had. Was it Parkinson's that you mentioned?
Yeah.
And then, you know, hours of service or logbook violations probably going to take you down if you don't have a clean driving history, all these other things. But so basically, the point of this is just to spark a little more conversation about, you know, the things that drive, like mistakes that are made, things that can drive these verdicts higher. And then I guess when it happens, the attorneys, let's start with the 2 attorneys. What should companies expect? What to do in the aftermath of an accident? Just some basic pointers to get us started here.
Well, just I'll follow up on your question, and then I'll let Lee answer. But I want to mention one thing is that we talked. Age of the driver was something that was you know in your survey, and there is something about the age, but I'll tell you, this is the better key. How long has that driver been with you? And when and it doesn't matter how old the driver is, it doesn't matter how experienced the driver is. Has the driver been with you 6 months? Once the driver has been with you for 6 months, the risk starts dropping substantially. Those first 6 months, even for a driver with 10 years experience, or 20 years experience, those 6 months are still the same 6 months. So those first 6 months are critical for how you manage that driver. So if I had a trucking company, I would have a pretty intensive program for those first 6 months. And the idea is that not only do you have to train them during those 6 months, you have to make sure that you're keeping them beyond the 6 months. Because if you replace a driver, now you've got another driver entering that 6 month period. So we've got to get the drivers out of the 6 month period and then retain those drivers. So anyway, that's just a demographic. That's a statistical fact, is that 6 months is magic.
Reynolds, can you repeat the question? I was so engrossed in what Rob
yeah, it was.
about
I
there.
didn't. It was poorly framed. Let me ask a simpler question. Are there any common mistakes that companies make in the aftermath of an accident? Start with that.
I mean, how long we got left?
Yeah.
Let's maybe a top 2 or 3 mistakes that companies make.
You know, it's always a tough call whether or not to fire somebody if there's been a catastrophic accident. And I would say in my experience, it's you know, 75% of the time they make the wrong decision, but I don't know what the right one is. It's case by case basis and depending on the guy's history. You know, not to me as the lawyer, not preserving evidence, not preserving documents, not having good systems in place to show you know, how good folks were, because, you know, they want to knock the door down when it comes to, you know, stuff that's otherwise usually inadmissible in terms of you know, prior history, or you know, likelihood that this driver was going to get in an accident, but some of that can become admissible, right? And I was going to say here, at least here in Florida, if you sue a trucking company for an accident and the driver was in the course and scope of his employment, in other words, he was doing what he was supposed to be doing when he got in the accident, you can't sue the company. You know, there's case law that says you don't have a valid claim for negligent hiring and retention. However, there's a caveat to that. If you have a separate claim of damages, you do, right? So now what's happening here is everybody and their mother wants to try to find a reason to get punitives, because you can now bring that direct claim against the company. Otherwise, they're only vicariously liable for the acts and, as Rob said, God willing, the mistake in the moment of their driver, right? But that's not the money these plaintiffs' counsels want. So, you know, I guess my advice to that, what have they done wrong in this situation, is, you know, make sure the guy was doing what he was supposed to be doing when he was doing it. And, you know, as Joe said earlier, follow your guidebook, follow your handbook. If you're follow your hiring practices, do your due diligence, spend the whatever, you know, a couple $100 to make sure you fully vet these guys before you put them on behind the wheel of your trucks. Right. I mean, it's pound, or it's, what do you call it? Penny foolish, or penny wise, pound foolish, right? Like, if you don't spend the extra money on the front end, you're just going to spend twice as much, I mean, 10,000 times as much on the back end.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd agree with Lee. And it's about preservation. Spoliation is the biggest mistake I see people make, is that they think that they don't need to keep something, and now we've got, again, something else to explain to the jury. Why don't we have this? You know, it's always, you know, again, back to Trump, everything's a conspiracy. Okay. So the plaintiff's lawyers are going to paint the conspiracy of you know, this wasn't an innocent mistake. This was a cover up. This is Watergate. You know, that's people don't know what Watergate is anymore, but so that was, I mean, it's all about the cover up. And to back on something else Lee said, the driver may get fired. It's my job to hold that driver's hand and to be his friend when he needs a friend. You know, if he gets fired, we're going to need that driver to show up at trial. We're going to need that driver to give a deposition. So we've got to preserve the relationship, not necessarily with the company, but with the defense counsel. So when your insurance company is defending you in these accidents, you've got to make sure that lawyer is forming a relationship with the driver, so that the driver's going to do what we need to do when he's needed. Now, I'll also tell you this is the dirty little secret that nobody talks about, is that your insurance policy that you buy provides payment for the driver to cooperate in the litigation. And so tell the driver that, say, hey, look, we can pay you, you know, to come help us in this litigation. I know you've got another job. You know, you're at Walmart now. You're the greeter at Walmart because you can't be a truck driver anymore because you had this wreck. But we'll reimburse you for your time away from your job so that you can help us with this litigation. And it's not an inconsequential commitment for the driver, because if the driver's going to get deposed, I'm probably going to spend a day and a half with the driver getting ready for his deposition in a big case, maybe longer than that. You know, so it's a huge commitment to the prep, huge commitment for given a 7-hour deposition. You know, it's something that you can't take for granted. So don't cut off that relationship with the driver. We've got to preserve our relationship with the driver to keep him on our side.
Yeah, I got a couple bad stories about that, but
yeah. Well, and the plaintiff's bar is their strategy now is to make the driver the second victim of the accident. So if only they would have trained you how to do this, this wouldn't have happened. and they get the driver to go along with that and to say, yeah, if they would have trained me, this wouldn't have happened. It's all their fault, not my fault.
Just real quick, I'll tell a quick story. I had one of our clients, trash removal guy, wound up running over a woman with an 18-wheeler and didn't know it. Drove away, got halfway back to where he was supposed to be because he never knew it. Just didn't even feel it. It was a slow moving anyway. And it was obviously just happened pre-suit. The company has risk people. They have people that are very well versed in the law, what to say, what not to say. And they, specifically asked us not to talk to him yet. We'll get there. A couple months later, they were finally saying, okay, we want you to go meet with the guy today. We're going to be terminating him, but right now he's on leave, et cetera, et cetera. We got there and this guy was an absolute wreck. I mean, my partner and I were sitting down talking to him and he was crying the entire time. He looked emaciated. He looked like he had been, on the edge for the month or two, whatever, since he found out this happened. And nobody told her that he died. Nobody told him she died. Right. So now we go from a position where, okay, maybe there's aspects of this case we can defend because this woman walked right in front of the truck. I mean, she really took a lot on herself. And it went from maybe we can defend this to 100% we can't defend this. This guy we're never going to be able to put him on the stand. And he was treated poorly. If I had been there, as Rob said, to be his buddy, to hold his hand, to explain things to him, to talk to him. I mean, unfortunately, we have to do that sometimes. It might have been better, but they paid a lot of money for what it was, and maybe more than they ought to have.
So Reynolds, before we move on from this, I would just tell you that question brings 15 different things to mind for me, but I'm going to hit on one that I've seen, and it's sleeping on the small ones. Okay. I've seen this time and time again where there's an accident with another vehicle. And let's say it's a lane change. They're both merging into negotiating that middle lane. Light side swipe, hardly paint scraped on the vehicle. And next thing you know, because it's not reported, because they're like, we can handle it. The guy was fine at the scene. They go and lawyer up. And all of a sudden you have someone who's claiming bodily injury, even though they were walking around at the scene totally fine. So I would tell those on the phone, I talk to any fleets I talk to, don't sleep on the small ones. Even if you say, we got this, make it a notice only claim to your insurance carrier. So they're not getting blindsided. They could prepare a file. I would tell you to, we talked about information is perishable, right? So let's talk about getting witness statements, even on the small ones. Get those witness statements that everything's good, because now 6 months down the road and they're like, geez, I got a bad back, and they think about the trucking company they want to sue. Well, when they go back to that statement within 24 hours of the accident, and you said, yes, I was the one who kind of went into them. Yeah, it was barely touched. It was, scratched paint, and everybody was fine. We left the scene. Well, now that information is a statement that's going to probably have the attorney say, you know what, I'm going to walk away from this one. But if you don't have that, if you slept on it, they're going to be all over you. So don't sleep on the small ones.
Great. Man, Rob, that Cardinal's going nuts back there.
He is. He's
is something else.
He's wanting to get on camera here. He's been there for a month. He's been banging on this window for a month.
That's great. So actually, I don't have any other specific questions. I did want to leave the chance, though, for Rob and Lee especially to bring it. I think one of the most helpful things from this conversation has been to hear specific anecdotes that you've brought in, examples that make us think, oh, wow, we should be considering that. And I'm wondering, wanted to give you the floor if there are other cases you're trying now or recently that you think something happened and it's a good learning for everyone else. Is there anything that comes to mind that you'd want to share with us?
Well, the only thing that, I've shared a couple of the ones that come to mind that we've been doing lately, but something that Joe just said about sleeping on small ones. One of the ones, like I mentioned earlier, pardon me, was this side swipe where our guy drove away because he didn't even know it. They had crash detection, didn't spark any crash detection going off, anything. And so that night they're like, okay, it's a nothing. The guy's fine. There was a short form. There was no injury on the police report. Going, okay. And my client hauls for a major big box store. So the trailers are theirs. And the allegation was that it hit the trailer and they never got a hold on it. And we're going to trial on this one. We've been continued a couple of times, but we're going to trial. There's no middle ground. And I'll be honest, we're having to talk our way around. Why didn't you call, whatever, I won't say the name of the company, but why don't you call Kmart? They're not around anymore, right? Or I don't know, whatever, whoever's not around. And they're basically like, well, we didn't, they have to stop short of saying we didn't know there was an accident because they were told there was one, but they're like, well, our driver didn't even think he got hit and he didn't see anything on the trailer. So we just let it go. There probably was nothing on the trailer, right? But why sleep on it? Why not say, let us take a hold. Let us send somebody out to document it. We can, nowadays, a lot of my local guys will do a laser scan of your vehicle, fairly inexpensively. Why not preserve that right now and then let, Kmart have their truck back?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you too that in a trial setting, turnover is a killer. When you've got when you're putting up witnesses and they didn't work there at the time and somebody else was the safety director and safety director's gone, and we've gone through 3 safety directors in the 5 years since this accident, that's a bad look. And again, there's only so many things you get to explain. Let's not waste them on the easy things.
And Reynolds, I would just jump in and add one here that sticks out to me because you've heard us talk about cameras today. So we had a fleet going down the roadway, goes through an intersection. Elderly couple comes through this intersection. We T-bone them. Elderly couple are both killed in the intersection in this accident. 3 witnesses told the police officer that our driver ran the red light. And now our driver's handcuffed in the back of the vehicle, possibly facing vehicular manslaughter. You're looking at limits losses. And you want to talk about the power of the video. We downloaded the video, sent the video to the police officer who wrote up the report. He watched the video and saw that when you can freeze frame this video and see that as we're entering the intersection, light's still green, just turning yellow. But what happened is those 3 witnesses didn't lie. They're locked in on an accident, but then they look up, split second, the light's red. They're like, yeah, he ran a red light. But with that video, you're able to pause it. And the police officer's like, wow, I got it all wrong. He rewrote that police report, and that changed the outcome of that accident tremendously. And that driver, for his family, for his career. So it's the power of video is huge. I like to refer to it as the ultimate witness, because 3 witnesses got trumped by the ultimate witness that was paused, freeze framed, and you showed that he was doing everything right. So for those on the call here that don't have cameras, I think every one of us would highly encourage you to take that next step.
No question about it, especially with the way rates are going from an insurance perspective. If you can show that level of care, it's going to help you from an underwriting perspective as we go to market. So there's not just the claims aspect, it's the insurance cost as well. So
yeah. So we're coming close to our time. We need to end by 11:30. I want to make sure to give some space if people want to put questions into the Q&A about any topics we didn't cover or anything you want to see in more depth. So I just want to pause for a moment here to give you a chance to offer any other questions if there are any.
We answered
while we're waiting. Oh, there's a question.
Yep, one came out here. Someone asked if you can mention more about the FMCSA, the SMS report, and SAFER report. I don't know who, Matt, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important aspect for any company to know that has, a DOT number out there that, there's different metrics that are looked at, from a maintenance perspective, a driver perspective, if you're hauling hazmat, but anybody with a DOT number, when they get a roadside inspection and a trooper writes up a report, that's going to get reflected in your SAFER score. And so it's an important metric to monitor. I know Joe and I use it every day. The insurance companies from an underwriting perspective go to what's called the CAB report, which is again something that measures every aspect of a fleet's on-road behavior. from driver behavior to, again, maintenance. So it's a really, really important metric for anyone with a DOT number to pay close attention to. Joe, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And to build on that, I would say, one, remember what this panel was all about was nuclear verdicts. All those scores and all that data is public information, right? So those are, we like to refer to them as patterns in practice, right? Are you adhering to the hours of service, or do you have a pattern of not adhering to it? Are you taking care of your equipment, or do you have a pattern of having tires and brake issues? Is speeding, distracted driving, is that something that you allow, right? Because it's all based on peer grouping. So if you're in alert status versus your peers, and then you go to court, this is something that they're going to use against you, that no, based on your peers, you're not executing in these areas. So it's really important to own those scores. And that's why I talked about keeping a scorecard, letting your drivers know and make sure that you're not in alert status. And then the part two to this is thinking about that ISS, your inspection selection system. Who wants to be targeted when you pull into a roadside inspection? Stay out of the red, right? Get that score to a green so that they're going to give you the thumbs up and let you pass. You don't want to be stopped all the time and being put out of service.
Yeah. Our senior safety consultant, Ralph Thresher, is on the call and wants to remind everyone to make sure the SMS is viewed at least monthly as a part of the safety program. So thanks, Safety Ralph. Love having Ralph on our team. Any other questions? I don't see any right now. Give it another couple seconds here. Well, we covered a lot today, gentlemen. I want to just take a moment to thank you for your time, especially Rob and Lee joining us from the world of law and the attorneys. We really appreciate it. This is a long session, but really important. I know everyone got a lot out of it. So thank you so much for joining us today. I also want to say we're going to follow up with our attendees with a recording here, and we're also can share a couple of resources. If any of you on this call are unsure about this stuff, or you're like, well, I don't even know what that meant, what we were talking about, I want to just make sure you know that we have a lot of resources at Alera Group. We've got Joe at HF&C, we got Matt at Webber and Grinnell, Ralph's on the call as a senior safety consultant. This is what we do every day, and we'd love to talk to you and advise you and work together with you on this stuff. It's super important to stay safe, and as we've seen from this call, it can have big ramifications for your business. So please keep us in mind. I
just want to add to that, Joe and I also rely on our partners like Rob and Lee too. So it's not just those that are here, but it's our relationships that we really rely on. And so I think those are important resources to mention as well. So
Great.
Well, thanks again. Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll have follow up and enjoy your weekend.
See you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Guys, thank you.